So if you see here, I decided to connect to the database using an ORM. This is called it GORN. And I think because it makes my life much easier when it comes to serialize things into the database and back. And I think that it opens space for further discussions later, like, does it add value to stick to an ORM framework or two? My personal understanding is yes, I like GORN, but it would be good to hear different opinions about that. So the idea here is very simple. This is the main method. We will create a database connection here. We will set up the tables. This is how GORN will create the tables for us based on a type. We will create a simple server. And I added some routes to the server here to allow us playing around with it. So this route will start the pproof tool inside of our process. And this tool will stop pproof as we finish doing our load test. This is important because this will allow us to evaluate from a pproof perspective how is the total running time, what is the total running time composition based on the functions that have been triggered. Then on these two routes here, we'll be doing something. These are the real two core routes for our case here. The first route is where we're going to play around with generics. So the idea here is I have a route that will wrap my business logic on top of a generic adapter. I'll explain this later as I show you the code for this one. And on this route, I will adapt my business logic based on an interface. So if you see here, unfortunately, based on the approach that I decided using, I would be required to explicitly give my business logic a type or actually a variable of the type that I want to use to serialize the serialize parameters here. When we see the adapter, this will make more sense. This is just for making it a complete solution, an exit route that will close the server and finish the process for us. And then here, basically what we do is we set up the server, making it listen, and we see if we get any error being dropped later. Before we dive into the business logic, let's take a look at the adapters here. My goal with these adapters is that we can decouple everything related to how do I transform the HTTP request into a call to my business function, and how can I get rid of coding and coding and coding whenever I need to send back the return value of my business function through the protocol that has been used to trigger that function. We're talking about HTTP here, but I think it would be pretty much the same with gRPC and other protocols that could be used for triggering a remote function, okay? So this is an adapter. Theoretically speaking, I would like to write it only once and use the same adapter for any business logic that I want to trigger. Why these adapters are important? As we may discuss later, inside these adapters, I could add logic for authentication, authorization, logging, and other stuff that may be common to all my logic methods or most of them. So, given that we are using a generic adapter on the code that I'm showing you, I basically here say, hey, you have a generic input parameter, you have a generic output parameter. And then you're going to receive something that is a function that will always have a context as first parameter, then something as a second parameter, and that will always return something else as a return value or an error just in case, being inside and outside the two generic parameters we want to provide to this function. And our adapter here, as you can see, will return just a second, it will return HTTP handler function here, which we can pass to our router, muxes, etc., and allow them to route the call. So based on the approach that I have adopted for this generic adapter, here we would decode the input value from our request. If you see here, I'm getting the request and I'm reading the parameter from here. I'm going to show the code this function has later. If for any reason I cannot unmarshal it, we have an error. If not, we call our business function with whatever we have read from the request and collect the value that we will be sending back and an error. If we get an error, we print the error, we return the error. Otherwise, we will marshal the response and send it back to whoever has called the function. If you guys know generics, this should be very simple in terms of understanding what's happening here. We create an instance of a generic type, we decode it, and then we use it in our business logic. Later on, what the business logic returns to us, in the generic way, we encode it again and send it back over the wire. Now, I would like to compare this kind of approach with the traditional interface approach. This is a similar adapter. It will use similar logic. But here we have a generic interface, an empty interface as part of our